Looks like we're starting to slow down in terms of the intake, so we'll go ahead and get things started. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for being a part of today's Mountain Talk conversation, talking about the impacts and understanding the challenges of public education in K through 12. My name is Bryce Neff. I am the Associate Director of College Affinity and Faculty Engagement here at Lehigh University with the Alumni Relations team. A couple of housekeeping notes I want to address before we begin with our presenter. Today's presentation is going to be recorded, so if you need to drop off early for whatever reason, we will have the remainder of the content and presentation ready for you on YouTube within about a week or so. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can utilize the chat function to submit any of your questions, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation for the open Q&A. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Janice Holowka. So Janice is a 1989 graduate from Lehigh University. She got a bachelor's degree in marketing as well as an MBA in international marketing from the Euro-Asian Management Institute. And she's going to be talking about a variety of issues today that are impacting K through 12 schools and public education, including pandemic-related learning loss, the increased reliance on social media, gaming, and cell phones, and how that's affecting student communication and relationships, as well as technologies such as Google and generative AI and how students are utilizing that and changing the way that learning and formation of ideas is done. She'll also address issues around systemic issues around school discipline, the lack of staff training and support, and the failure to equip students with foundational literacy, comprehension, and math skills that are necessary later in life. Janice Lee Holowka is a San Diego-based K-12 educational consultant with a mission to advance positive change in public education. She is currently establishing a consultancy firm focused on root cause analysis, collaborative problem solving, and the development of actionable and sustainable solutions to the systemic challenges facing students, families, and educators. So Janice, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear about your perspective. Working in higher education, these are certainly conversations that faculty at Lehigh are having around current students and prospective students that are going to be coming in. So really excited to hear your perspective on the topic today.
Great. Thank you all so much for being here today. First, just a little bit about myself. I was born in New York, but grew up in New Jersey, where I attended public schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I can go to the next slide. I had a great education, not just academically, but in ways that emphasized leadership, teamwork, and giving back. And back then, college wasn't the only goal. Trades like plumbing, mechanics, and other skilled professions were equally respected, and I still carry a deep appreciation for all career goals. I went on to attend Lehigh University, where I received a strong education and learned from professors who genuinely cared about their students. I also built great friendships. Years later, when my Lehigh friend and I both had daughters in high school, I said to her, "Thank goodness who we were in high school isn't who we are when we grow up." And she replied back, "We weren't so great in college either, but look how great we turned out." After college, I moved to England. I worked in New York and then moved to England and lived there for 21 years. That's where my two amazing children were born. They're very different from each other, and parenting them really shaped how I think about learning, ability, and education systems. When my son came home from school one day and apologized for having privilege, I told him, "We worked hard for you to have that privilege. Think like Spider-Man. With great power or privilege comes great responsibility." All of these experiences, growing up in public schools, raising kids, living abroad, and reflecting on what really makes education meaningful, led me to change careers and become an education consultant. Now I'm launching a consultancy focused on helping create broader, lasting change, because even if it's a cliche, it's true. Young people really are our future. Okay, next slide. So today's conversation is about taking a look at the state of public education, what's shaping it, the consequences, why it matters, and the solution that require all of us to be part of the conversation. We'll start with a snapshot of where things are right now in our schools today, then examine the key challenges and systemic issues and the broader impact on our economy, our communities, and our shared future. Then look at solutions, concrete strategies, and opportunities that require all of us to work together to strengthen public education in ways that are inclusive, sustainable, and meaningful. Finally, we'll wrap up with time for discussion and questions, including as an opportunity to hear the challenges and successes you've been seeing in your own states and communities, to learn from each other and to deepen our collective understanding of what's needed moving forward. Thanks. Okay, next slide. Where we are. Some key factors currently shaping the state of public education include a declining enrollment in many states. This trend is driven by demographic changes and the growing popularity of alternatives like charter schools, private schools, and homeschooling. Special education needs have nearly doubled from around 8% of students in 2000 to roughly 14% today. This rise reflects improved identification practices, broader definitions of disability, and increased awareness among families and educators. However, schools' capacity to deliver the legally required services has not kept pace, leaving many students without the support they are entitled to. Academic proficiency is slipping, with a significant number of students not meeting grade level expectations in core subjects like English and math, with national assessments reporting declines in proficiency levels, particularly among certain student groups. And political polarization is intensifying. This is fueling conflicts over curriculum, equity policies, parental rights, and the professional autonomy of educators, often pulling focus away from what students truly need to thrive. Rapid technological change is outpacing schools' ability to keep up, whether it's integrating new tools, training staff, or ensuring all students have access to digital resources. Concurrently, educators are under increasing pressure to respond to emerging technologies like AI in real time. Students are facing increased academic and social pressure, which can erode their confidence, resilience, and long-term success if not addressed. And then mental health issues continue to rise, with many schools being under-equipped to respond. And funding remains unstable, unequal, and too often mismanaged due to local property tax disparities, uneven state and federal support, but also from school district decisions that divert funds away from classrooms and student support into legal fees or bureaucracy. Okay, next slide. Now let's look at some of the deeper systemic challenges affecting students, educators, and schools, which include increased screen time through social media, gaming, and smartphones, which has reduced in-person interaction, weakening students' collaboration skills, their emotional intelligence, and their ability to interpret nonverbal cues like body language, tone, and sarcasm. There's the double-edged sword of technology, as digital tools like Google, AI, Wikipedia, and Reddit can provide quick answers and reduce time spent on homework, but they can also undermine critical thinking, discourage deep inquiry, and limit schools' ability to brainstorm with each other and solve problems collaboratively. Foundational skills are declining, such as literacy, writing, math, executive functioning, and critical thinking skills are declining among students, exacerbated by over-reliance on technology tools like AI, writing aids, and speech-to-text applications. And finally, school safety is a concern, as incidents of bullying, harassment, and behavioral disruptions are too often mishandled or ignored due to inconsistent discipline policies and a lack of clear supportive systems for prevention, accountability, and student well-being. Okay. Now the next, why it matters. Failing to address systemic challenges in K through 12 public education can have far-reaching consequences, such as deepening economic inequalities as inconsistent access to quality education widens achievement gaps, limits upward mobility, and perpetuates cycles of poverty. Rising long-term costs as unmet academic and mental health needs lead to higher societal cost in healthcare, unemployment, and criminal justice. Declining global competitiveness. As a poorly educated population weakens innovation, productivity, and the country's ability to compete globally. There's workforce unpreparedness as students lacking foundational skills in literacy, math, and critical thinking are less ready for higher education and today's job market. Greater burden on higher education and businesses. As colleges and employers are forced to spend more time on remediation and training to compensate for unprepared students and unqualified employees. There's the erosion of social cohesion, given that when schools fail to foster civic responsibility, empathy, and collaboration, it weakens community trust and engagement. And finally, growing public safety concerns, as inadequate support for student behavior and mental health can lead to increased bullying, school violence, and dropout rates. Okay, next slide. What we can do, solutions, strategies, and opportunities. Um, as we've looked at some of the challenges facing public education, many which are deep-rooted and complex. Let's look at meaningful steps we can take individually and collectively to strengthen our schools and support our students. This next part is about moving from insight to action. It's about rethinking what's possible and recognizing that everyone, educators, families, community members, taxpayers, and policymakers, has a role to play. Among other things, we need to invest in early literacy and math instruction, setting the foundation for lifelong learning. And it's something families and community members can actively support through tutoring, mentoring, and volunteering. Strengthen mental health supports by increasing access to school counselors, social workers, and trauma-informed practices, and by providing mental health education and resources for staff, students, families, and community members. Prioritize professional learning for educators. Educators need high quality, ongoing professional development. That includes culturally responsive training and tools to support a wide range of learners, from students with disabilities and gifted students to those from diverse racial and cultural backgrounds. Create consistent and transparent systems for discipline and student support that prioritize safety, equity, and accountability while addressing harm, supporting healing, and preventing recurrence. Emphasize critical thinking, executive functioning, and problem-solving skills. As students need more than facts, they need critical thinking skills, media literacy, organizational skills, and experience solving problems collaboratively in school, at home, and with peers. Equip students to navigate technology wisely. Help children and young adults use digital tools like AI, search engines, and social media platforms with care, creativity, and creative thinking and critical thinking. Educator, parents, employers, and mentors need to act collaboratively to foster responsible, informed, and ethical tech use. Promote strong partnerships with families and the community to support student learning, well-being, empathy, and leadership, because supporting student success is a shared responsibility. And finally, get involved in your local schools and district. Vote, even if you have to vote for the least worst candidate, and run to be a trustee on your local school board or county board of education, as these board members are elected, not hired, and And also attend your local school board meetings where you can voice your concerns publicly. Because whether you're a parent, taxpayer, or neighbor, supporting education is an investment in the future of our communities. Thank you. And let's talk. I mean, I'd love to hear what other people are experiencing, or if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janice. I know that there's a variety of experiences that our audience has. I'm sure there's a number of alumni that are, currently parents, as well as, some faculty and staff who may be on the call who can certainly share their insight about what they've seen on the higher ed side of things. A couple of questions that I had kind of as you presented. So talking specifically about the rise in special education, there's been, as you mentioned, increased, programs and recognition for the various needs of students. But with that, what are some populations who may be at risk, or what are some ways that school districts can, maybe reinvest and support students who have some alternative needs outside of the general population?
I think this is a problem going across the US because as we learn more about how students learn, more students are going to be diagnosed. And I think a big factor is that it's important to recognize that that we all learn differently. We have and to not only have special education staff that can recognize the struggles and to help students, I guess, learn ways to manage and react to how they think, but also all general education teachers need to have some training on the way, I guess, diverse learners think, because not all special ed students, in general, most special ed students spend the majority of time in general education classes. So, and each child's needs are different. And therefore, like, I think we need to do better on supporting students because the academic pressure that students are feeling don't allow them to, I guess, figure out tools that they need to compensate. Like I'm pretty sure I had ADHD, but nobody cared. But I didn't have the academic pressure in high school, and so I was able to learn how to compensate. And so I know that I can't read a boring, let's say, reading comprehension and be able to answer the questions meticulously. So I skim the comprehension, then look at the questions and go back because I understand how I learned, but I was able to have that I guess the luxury of being able to figure out how I learned on my own because I didn't have that academic pressure. I mean, kids these days are under so much pressure and they are given more opportunities to fail than they are to succeed. And I felt that when I was growing up, it was all about helping students succeed. I hope that
Wonderful.
answered the questions and I didn't get
Sure,
too.
yeah. And then something else I wanted to address, obviously the increased reliance and increased impact on technology. Generative AI and ChatGPT are massive resources and have a massive mind share in kind of current public culture. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier before the presentation about the impact in critical thinking skills and the reliance on those pieces. So with that, what can be done about that? The technology isn't going away. And schools are obviously having conversations around, what is equitable use, what is allowable use. There's certainly instances of high school students that are utilizing ChatGPT and generative AI on their college essays, and there's technology to catch those things. But what should be done either at a local district level, a state level, a federal level in terms of policy? Is there anything that can be done on those aspects? But what are some things that we should be on the lookout for and ways that we can address as those tools become more and more prevalent and more advanced?
I think it's really important to work with students and how they can use these tools effectively. Like I love ChatGPT. Sometimes I feel like it's my best friends because I'll ask ChatGPT questions and ChatGPT will respond like, "Absolutely, I can help you with that." Where my children have never said that. I don't think. So, like, I think. And ChatGPT does save a lot of time. It can do help you do research, but I think it's important um, to make sure that we learn to use ChatGPT to make us better, but not necessarily to replace us. So, and ChatGPT is really only as good as, and a lot of these technology tools are only as good as you are. So, it's important to, I guess, build that relationship with AI so that they can give you information more effectively, but also not take away from brainstorming with other people or having that human interaction because these tools will a lot of times reinforce what you already think versus giving you different perspectives. And I think what's really important is to learn how to listen, to understand, and to develop to different perspectives rather than just hearing more of what you already believe or to reinforce what you already believe.
Gotcha. So we have a couple of questions that are coming in. I'll start with Alyssa's question first. So Alyssa states, so I have young kids and I'm concerned that academic and social expectations of these students don't align with the realistic expectations of their maturity. How do you think about helping young kids enter the classroom, meet expectations, but also not create anxiety and other mental health challenges because they're being expected to do more than they may be ready for? I think this is a really interesting question in the standpoint of, we almost forget that kids are still kids, and somebody who may be advanced compared to their peers is not necessarily advanced compared to a teenager or an adult. And like you had mentioned, the heightened impact and expectations and stress and needing to do well. So what are your thoughts around the realistic expectations of students in society within schools, and maybe some ways that those can be students can be better prepared as they go into the world?
And I think this is a really difficult struggle that we're having across the US as the academic pressure increases, and also because of the global competition to get into universities. And so I think there should be more emphasis on extracurricular activities and building resilience because a lot of students ne- um, in current times are placing so much emphasis on their grades. And so they're not building the soft skills and they're placing their self-worth on their grades. But on the other hand, it's tricky because they need to do that extra work and they need to take those AP classes in order to have more of a competitive chance to get into the university. So I think as parents, it's most important to build resilience in your children, and but it's difficult to not push them into or not supporting them in trying to do well at school, but also to try to find that balance. And it really depends on the individual child because some children are internally competitive, so they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves and also think that, their friendships and everything are people are judging them on how well they do in school. And other children are externally competitive. So they're good just as long as they're doing better than the guy next to them. So
Sure.
it's also important to understand your own children and look at what motivates them and the different factors that are affecting their lives. And a big impact is also the social pressure of social media because, children are less willing to take risks or make mistakes because their mistakes can be public and go across social media where, trust me, I made a lot of mistakes and I'm grateful that it was not public. But I think, what I say to my children, falling down gives you that opportunity to stand up. But it's important that young people do get up and they haven't fallen when they get up. So I think,
Sure. Yeah, I think this also reflects the importance of having really engaged parents and engaged families into to what their children are doing. I think about the importance that my parents put on an education and making sure that I was doing well in school. And I certainly was a kid who did not live up to my capabilities for a number of reasons. But the importance of knowing what's going on in your children's lives, being engaged in what their interests are, and having a presence and supporting them in a way that doesn't put pressure on them to just because Bobby Joe over there is absolutely killing it and crushing it. You might have another friend who may not be doing as well. And there's a bell curve of averages, and it's hard to explain what a bell curve is to kids, but having that engagement and being connected to your student's education and your child's education is vastly important.
and not
All
all
right.
parents can be engaged. And so I think it's also for important for young people to learn how to support each other too.
Mhm.
So, I think having that the social media and also so much screen time is also taking away from kids being together and learning how to support each other. And I think that's really important that that children, young people, students learn how to support each other too.
Yeah. All right, so Britza asks an interesting question. So she states, so I've worked with middle and high school students through the AVID program, which I'm not familiar with, but I'm sure it's something local within your region. And I have found that the most challenging part of tutoring them is helping them gain the motivation to complete their work. Either they're hungry, tired, upset, hyper, or experiencing a variety of other emotions. So what can we do to help them navigate their emotions in the classroom so that they can focus on learning? I think this brings up a really interesting question around social emotional learning and emotional regulation and the environment that you're in and what's appropriate for certain times. I'm sure that we all can think back to our own school experiences of either elementary school or middle school where there was a student who had was very disruptive or very vocal. So what can be done in terms of a social emotional aspect, in supporting students in, navigating their emotions so that way they can focus and prioritize what's happening in the classroom?
And I think some of it is also I guess it's not just students with disabilities that, sometimes get overlooked, and sometimes they have behavioral disabilities that get overlooked, but it's also English language learners because sometimes English language learners have disabilities, but they think that they're having difficulties because they're not proficient in English. Or students who are have disabilities or students who are English learners and have disabilities are often treated as that their disabilities are impacted more. So I think it's difficult because each children's needs are unique, but something to address is why is the student getting distracted or why are they hungry? And so some of it is to maybe provide that snack if before you start or to address like, is it that that maybe they can't focus, or it's about confidence too, that they don't want to get started because they're not sure that they can do it or it's an effort. But to kind of find out what's happening around them. And I know it's difficult because, like, especially in a larger group setting, that, because a child's needs are very different and they might be infected, but also It's to pay attention to how their behavior is impacting other children too. So, because it's very hard we're always looking at the kid who's being disruptive, but then not always looking at how it's impacting the other students in the classroom too.
And I think this, kind of actually leads into another question that I had. And you had mentioned about the lack of training and lack of support for, well, support staff and support for teachers. My sister was a former high school teacher, teaching AP classes, and she, constantly had pressure from from the administration around needing to, make adjustments because they were getting pressure from the district and from parents. So what are, some alternative, ways or things that districts and school systems can do to support or incentivize teachers to do those investments in their students? I'm thinking about, how often I've heard about, people who have been working in the education systems and working in public schools that, were maybe only in the system for a handful of years, maybe 5, 10 years at most, and then they got so burnt out that they had to leave. What are some things that you've heard about or that you've seen in your consultancy, either here within the States or from other systems outside of the United States that school districts can do to support teachers and keep, retain them as staff that can continue to support their students?
And I think that's a big issue is are our teachers being supported? Because the teachers are the ones who are actually delivering the service. They're delivering education. And a lot of times the administrators who were teachers or are not giving them the support that they need. And so, I believe in professional development of teachers. Like, when it's very different, ongoing because the world is changing. So, there needs to be continued support of our teachers if we expect our teachers to support our students.
Mhm.
And, I think there is so much more of a greater emphasis on test scores and the results, particularly for AP exams, because, the AP teacher needs to get their to be evaluated. They're evaluated somewhat on how well their students do on the AP exams, but the AP exams are just teaching students how to answer questions the way that their examiner wants them to ask the questions. And I think in general, we need to start looking at this because do we want our students to be innovative and to question and to respond and think out of the box, or do we want them to, um, you know, be taught to how to sit standardized testing?
Yeah, and I think that students, as education systems adapt, like students are also adapting and learning. In the standpoint of like much of what you're saying is like students aren't necessarily taught to think critically and logically as to why something is happening. They're just told, here's the information you need to know. I'm going to test you on the information that you need to know, and it's just regurgitation. So Lori presented an interesting question. So she states, so I've been more in private school circles, and the latest thoughts are for classical education and less use of technology. Have there been any discussions in public school systems about changing to a more classical mindset to training students and connecting with nature and learning more thinking? So almost taking a step back from it and removing some of the technology from the classroom, almost going to a more Socratic, I guess you could say, system around that. So are there any conversations in any of the districts that you've worked with in your consultancy that have been looking at, maybe trying to remove more of the technology from the classroom and adapting a more, I guess you could say traditional or classical, method?
I think a lot of school districts, especially the elementary school districts, would like to see that, but And personally, I would like to see kids spend more time outside doing things rather than being passive learners. Because I think a lot of kids learn better by doing, right? So, whereas when you're just watching videos or texting, it's not as interactive as being with other students. But on the other hand, it's hard. We are in a, current environment of technology. So it's tricky to say, like, at some point, kids, students or children are going to be exposed to technology, whether you expose it to them when they're younger or they're older. And a lot of times when you prevent kids from using technology or from gaming or then they're even more addicted. And that's something that we have to be mindful of is that at some point they leave home. So they go to university and we don't, if you're too restrictive at home and don't teach responsible use of technology, I've heard of incidences of students going to college and then not going to classes because they have a choice. And so they'll sit in their rooms and game and get, because they realize that no one's going to stop them. So I think it's trying to find that balance, and I think, being out in nature, like nothing replaces that, the vitamin D, all that, and just that physical exercise to get that kind of sense of well-being is great. But
Yeah, I think being able to, have some opportunity to be outside and be in a different type of environment than a traditional classroom is wonderful, but it's just unfortunate that a lot of school systems just don't have that capacity or availability. If you have a school of 500 or 1,000 students, there's only so much outdoor space that you can utilize or that, teachers and administrators can use to maximize that. Um,
depends on where you live too. I mean, we lived in England, and then when we moved to California, my son was like, Daddy keeps saying, go outside, Greg. It's a beautiful day. He goes, every day's a beautiful day. I miss English weather because, then he had an excuse to stay home and game because it was raining out, right? And
Sure.
so,
So Juliana asks a question. So she is currently in graduate school to become a teacher and will be teaching in the 26-27 school year. So not this upcoming year, but the following year. What is your biggest advice that you would have for a new middle school or high school teacher?
oh, first, thank you for going into
That's
the
definitely.
I think middle school is tough because I think that's the age when, students are not at their best, but I think it's really important and I would look for schools that have opportunities for mentoring because I think there's so much pressure, especially on young teachers to not make mistakes, but then they're not given the mentoring or the support. And so, I would look for a teacher that is willing to invest their time in you too, to help you with your lesson plans and to help you navigate the system because it's very difficult to go into any profession after school, even though, like, when I graduated Lehigh, I thought, oh, I have this great college degree, I must be. And then at that time, when I went to work, I realized that I didn't have the office skills. So, like, they did not offer me a class at that time in photocopying because I was working on as a marketing assistant. So I was putting together like presentation books. And so I think it's also be kind to yourself. And so as a manager, I always thought like I have to invest in my staff because if I didn't have a great mentor, it would have been hard for me to be successful to navigate. So I would look for a mentor or look for schools that have those opportunities for collaboration. And I think more and more schools, districts are cutting the collaboration times. So.
Yeah. So another question I wanted to address, let's see if I can find it. So Valerie talked about kind of this, it's a long form question, but She had talked about, the increased, you had mentioned the increased availability of charter schools and alternative options outside of education. And parents are obviously, seeking the best thing that they can for their schools, but it's also creating a dichotomy in availability. So public schools are receiving less and less funding, and there's more and more options for charter schools at costs for certain families. But what can be done to, reinvest in those public school systems? Now, I think that when it comes to, taxes, I mean, you look at different school districts in the Chicago area, for example, where, you have students that are, teachers that have massive caseloads of students in one area, and then you go to one of the smaller suburbs, and there's a million more resources. So what can be done to, either adjust things from a policy perspective, or ways that we can, reinvigorate and reinvest in our public education systems, that so that way charter schools are maybe not necessarily as much of an attractive option?
I think it's to make public schools better. And I think some people, if people are choosing, families are choosing to go to charter schools or private schools or even homeschooling because they don't like the option of their public schools. And, and I guess it also depends on where you live too, because a lot of public schools are a portion of public school of all public schools are funded by property tax, and the funding of public schools is very complicated because some are basic aid or school districts, and others are attendance based. So, but on the other hand, I think there are certain charter schools that are meeting the needs of students that public schools can't, especially for some charter schools that are set up to support students with disabilities and in particular autism. And so I think it's to look, and we all want the best education for our children. And charter schools are actually don't get as much funding as public schools. So charter schools have to be funded partially by, well, they have to be sponsored by a public school district. And a portion of the funds that would go to charter schools is given to the public school to act in oversight of the charter school. So I think, we need to invest in public school education, but I don't think necessarily charter schools will take away from that. In some sense, I believe in competition. So if you're competing for free, like charter schools are public schools in terms that they're not fee paying, or the local public school, then I think it's competition. Your public school will have to be better in order to retain some of their students. And charter schools generally have a cap in attendance too. So I think if you're finding that a lot of a lot of students are choosing to go to charter schools over your local public school, the public school needs to take a real hard look and think why. And what can we do better to get students back here?
Gotcha. Well, with that, Janice, we are at time. I wanted to let our audience know. I know that we had some questions that we weren't able to address, but you're welcome to reach out. Janice, is there a good contact information that, if anybody has questions that they could reach out to you for?
Yes, I mean, I put my email in the chat, so I would love to hear from people and to hear to hear from folks like what's going on in their states. I'm in California, and I believe that California really needs to improve their public school system. So, but I would love to hear from you all. Feel free to email me. I had put my phone number in the chat. But
Okay.
I mean, in the on the slide, but then Bryce thought
Yep.
maybe not.
We'll say that. I think the email is
I know
sufficient enough.
email's
So,
good because
all
we
right,
do have a
everyone.
3 hour time difference from the
Sure,
East
sure.
Coast.
Right. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Janice, for that presentation and engaging with us and engaging with our audience. Thank you all for taking the time today to be a part of this. If you have any questions, you want to engage with the Alumni Relations Office at Lehigh, please feel free to reach out to me. And we will have another Mountain Talk for you guys coming up next month. So thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thanks.